It is another Friday, and we are here today to talk about how to communicate about customer experience. This is an Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything webinar, so be sure that as we go through today, get your questions ready. Feel free to drop that into the chat. I'm Jeannie Walters, and with me, as always, is David Hornrich, our Director of Marketing.
Hello, hello.
Hi, David. And David will be here to facilitate your questions, and we'll be sure to address those at the end of the presentation. But while you're joining us today, we always love hearing where you're from and any questions or comments that you want to add. Feel free to do that in the comments in both LinkedIn or YouTube. And if you're watching this later, because we do record this and post this, feel free to drop in questions or comments there too. We do try really hard to stay on top of those as well. So I know we have Saptarshi with us. Hello, Saptarshi from India. Good to see you. We have some other people joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get started, I think.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. So today we're talking about ways to communicate about customer experience. And this is really an internally focused discussion because a lot of times what happens is we are tasked with customer experience inside an organization. And then we're kind of told to change the culture. Like that's something you can just wave a magic wand about. But the organizations that do this really well, they talk about it over and over and over and in different ways. So that's what we're going to cover today. So first of all, for those of you who don't know me, I am Jeannie Walters. I am CEO and founder of Experience Investigators. And for 20 years, I've been helping organizations really look at how do they approach customer experience? How do they create better strategy? And then how do they really deliver that for their customers? And how do they do that through their employees? And so we do a lot of workshops and training and keynote speaking and things like that. And I love figuring things out, which is why we call this company Experience Investigators, because there's always so much to look at for customer experience. So we're so glad you're here. And we know that you have your own insights too. So feel free to drop those in the chat and share your experiences as well. So when we talk about customer experience, a lot of times, and I know some of you have experienced this as well, we hear about it reflected back to us as like, oh, that's a fad, that's a trend, that's one of those business buzz phrases that people talk about. And when it comes up within organizations, especially large organizations that have to kind of retrofit it, maybe this hasn't been something they've focused on, but now they need to. They will sometimes do things like say, okay, we are customer first. We are going to focus on customers. So they hang a banner or a poster. They get very excited about that initial kickoff idea. They announce it. They make a big deal about announcing it. Maybe it's a theme, but then they forget it. They basically say, this is the year of the customer. And then just like what happens with New Year's resolutions, by February, they've kind of moved on to just doing things the way they always have. Or they simply talk about it without actually putting any business discipline or rigor or specifics around it. And so it's hard to really understand, are we doing this well? Are we successful if we don't have real goals around it? And it's harder still for your employees who are trying to live up to something, but if it's not well defined and if they're not getting that reinforcement and they feel like nobody's paying attention anyway, then they're going to revert back to what they've always done in the past too. So organizations that do this well, that focus on customer experience, they actually never stop communicating about it. They never put it out as a thing and then kind of move on. It's part of their DNA. It's part of how they do business. And so they want to reinforce those messages in many, many different ways throughout their organization and with their employees. So, in the past, we've heard in marketing and advertising, there was this rule of 7. And that was the idea that people needed to hear something 7 times in order to remember it. Well, now there's data coming out saying that it's really the rule of 17 now. And that's because we are so inundated with information that we can't hold on to it like we used to. Our attention spans have gotten shorter. This is all documented now. And we just get so much input, so much stimuli, I should say, that when we are really trying to hold on to something and internalize it, make it part of our daily life, we need to hear that over and over and over. We need to reinforce that and underline that for our employees. So today we're going to talk about 12 tips that help you communicate about customer experience. The idea here is to give you some inspiration. I want you to think about what are the various ways that we can communicate about customer experience. And then in some cases, what we do with our clients is we actually create a an editorial calendar of sorts to really focus on what are the things we can reinforce throughout the year. So that's why it's 12, but feel free to use these however you want. This will be a little bit of a lightning round, and I'm going to go through these 12 things pretty quickly, but we will, have the list at the end again, so feel free to capture it there. Or if you're watching the video later, feel free to pause and look at the slides in a little bit more detail, or drop in a question. We're always happy to answer those too. So the 12 things that we're going to cover are: define your goals, identify your customers, connect the employee experience to the customer experience, share customer journey maps. We're going to talk about celebrating employee feedback, mentioning the metrics, asking team leaders to get involved, and all sorts of other things. So here we go. So the first one is start with the why. This is something we miss a lot in customer experience. I hate to say that, but it's true. We often talk about tactics before we've defined strategy, or we talk about strategy very nebulously, very vaguely. What I want you to do is really connect. Why are we focused on customer experience? What does that have to do with the employees here? And what does that have to do with our organization here? Well, the entire organization benefits from customer experience. We've talked about this in some of our previous webinars. But, when you look at what are we really doing to drive results? Why do we care about this? That is so important. Start there whenever you're communicating about customer experience and why every single employee in your organization should care about it. We also want to explain what that success looks like. So share how customer experience drives those results and how everybody in the organization will benefit by a focus on customer experience. So it's the why and then it's the what, really. It's about, so what? What will this do for me and the organization? We need to always come back to those things. We also want to connect employee experience to the customer experience in big ways. So show how employee experience is reflective of that external customer experience. And what I mean by that is, if you say things like, we want our customers to know that they can trust us. Well, how does trust show up in your organization from employee to employee? How is that part of your culture? So if you can really highlight employees who are delivering on your aspirational customer experience goals within the organization, that can help you move your culture forward. So make sure that you are connecting the employee experience with the customer experience and what you want out of the customer experience. What are your aspirations for that? We often use tools like customer journey maps, and then we kind of hoard them. We keep them to ourselves. Well, we need to share those far and wide with our employees. We need to make sure that our colleagues and our peers and all sorts of people throughout the organization see those tools and what they can do. Because customer journey maps and personas and all sorts of tools that we use in customer experience, they're really reflecting who our customers are and what they need from us. And we need to share that so that other employees who maybe weren't involved in that process still understand what that means. We get all of those insights. We get all of that information that we can use to create and design a better customer experience. So we want everybody in the organization to understand why, not just from that organizational perspective, but also from that customer perspective. And tools like journey maps can really help you socialize this and communicate it in powerful ways. Dive into those dashboards. Now, a lot of you out there have dashboards that are very readily available, right? Everybody sees them. Maybe it has your NPS on it. Maybe it has things like your retention rate. Maybe it just has kind of overall company health KPIs. But whatever it is, if you don't talk about it, if you don't dive into the details, if you don't help people understand what they're looking at, then it becomes kind of like wallpaper. And I've seen this in a lot of organizations where they have it maybe on the intranet. When you first log in, you might see a dashboard, or if you're in an office, you might see it on a big screen when you walk in. People literally walk by it. They can't tell you if those numbers are going up and down. They can't tell you what those numbers mean. So make it a point to communicate about what does our dashboard tell us and why should we care? And highlight those changes that are significant enough to talk about. So instead of just having people assume what those up and down metrics mean, talk to them about, you know what, we noticed our retention rate is slipping a little. What does that mean? Well, that means that we are losing customers faster than we're getting them, or we are dropping in ways that we didn't expect. So let's go back in the journey and figure out what can we correct? What were the issues that might have caused that? Really look into that root cause analysis, have people involved in that conversation, and you'll start seeing them internalize these things in bigger ways. Now, this is one of my favorites too. Let's interview a customer. Let's talk to customers. Let's find out what makes them tick and why do they love us or why do they not? By using the customer's real voice, the real story of who they are and what happened, that is a really powerful way to communicate because people can talk about customer experience all day long. You can talk about the data and the metrics, but it's very different hearing directly from a customer and what your work and your intentions and your efforts actually delivered for them. So asking a grateful customer to, show up on a video interview and then sharing that interview can be incredible. And I've seen this work really well in specific industries like healthcare, like insurance, like those high stakes moments. We need to remember why we're doing what we're doing and why the experience of the customer, the end to end journey, not just those high stakes moments, but the entire journey is so important. And so using that storytelling technique, listening to customers directly, so powerful. We also want to celebrate that employee feedback. This is one of my favorites too, because you know what? We are asking employees all the time for feedback. And just like customers, they want us to close the loop with them. So if they are willing to say, you know what? I think this could be better for the customer. If we have created those moments and mechanisms for them where they can provide that type of feedback to improve customer experience, we want to make sure that they feel heard and we want to make sure that they know that those suggestions and those recommendations create real change. So if you get a great idea from an employee through one of those feedback mechanisms, you want to make sure that you celebrate that you say, you know what, that is actually a great idea. We're going to change that. And once that change is implemented, celebrate that. Show all the employees, you know what, this came directly from you. This is amazing. This is going to change the experience for our customers for the better. And we couldn't have done this without you. Make sure we're closing that loop really publicly and celebrating those great ideas that employees are willing to give us. And I'm going to come back to metrics again, because when we talked about diving into those dashboard details, that was really about explaining the dashboard. But sometimes we explain things and we assume knowledge. We assume people understand what we are talking about when we say, oh, our NPS went up. Well, what I like to see is every once in a while, give a little primer, a little revisit to what do these metrics actually mean and why do we track them? What's the difference between customer satisfaction and net promoter score? How do we collect it? How do we make sure that we are analyzing it slightly differently? Do we look at customer effort score? Where do we look at that? Why do we look at that? Is that only in the self-service world, or do we look at, for instance, when people call into the service center, how do we track information there? And what does that tell us? And what actions does that prompt? So sometimes we do things like the metric of the month. If you are collecting a lot of data, if you have metrics all over the place that your employees are supposed to track that are connected to your key KPIs, your key performance indicators, then you want to take a moment and just visit one of those in a more detailed and in-depth way. Ask employees, what do they think it means? How could they improve it? What actions will that drive for them? Connect the dots as much as you can, but that metric of the month idea can be really powerful, especially for large organizations that have lots of different business units, lots of different ways to track. Just breaking it down in easy ways can really help everybody throughout the year understand that this is important, this is serious, and also it's not something you just talk about, it's something that you care about and put effort in. So make sure that you're zeroing in on those whenever you can. And then we want to get our team leaders involved. And when I say team leaders, I'm talking about all your team leaders, not just those customer facing groups. Because sometimes the mistake I see in customer experience communication is that we only think that we need to talk to our service center or our field agents or the cashiers, the frontline people. But you know that every single person in your organization is connected to the customer experience, even those people who never talk to customers. They are serving employees that do talk to customers, that do serve customers. They are providing processes and back end support to people and things that are supporting the customer experience. So everybody has to understand that. So when you can really look at your team leaders and say, help me understand, how do you and your team connect the dots to the customer experience? If you can get them thinking this way and then communicating to their teams, that is so cool, because I have seen where teams come together and they think, okay, we need to change this internally because now we understand it's not just that we're letting, and I shouldn't say letting our colleagues down, but it's not that we're under delivering a little bit to our colleagues. It's that we're not living up to what they need to do for our customers. Those are the types of mind shifts that we have to make. So when you're involving leaders in this process, they start seeing things everywhere and they start communicating this more with their teams. It's a great way to get them involved. And then one of my favorites, those of you who have been on these webinars before understand that I talk about this sometimes, but one of my favorite exercises in journey mapping or in any CX strategy work is this idea of wave a magic wand. If you did not have the limitations you have. So I don't want to hear about budgets. I don't want to hear about a lack of resources. I don't want to hear about how the marketplace is, against you or anything like that. You have a magic wand. What would you change on behalf of your customers? Because here's what happens. Thinking big like that, it can feel, like, oh my gosh, we don't have the budget to do this. We don't have these things. Thinking big like that unlocks a whole bunch of ideas that maybe you wouldn't have thought of with those limitations. By asking your employees this question, by, sending something out and saying, okay, everybody send in an idea, or, if you have an idea, here's where you put it. You'll start seeing things that could be on the roadmap. You'll start seeing things that you could start planning, that you could use as a disruption. There are so many ways to use these ideas, but we need to invite employees into the process in order for them to give us those ideas. And then we also want to really celebrate referrals. And what I mean by that is not just for customer referrals, but also employee referrals. Now, referrals are amazing because they, from a customer perspective, they completely lower the time that you need for your sales cycle. You are getting high reward customers because they are going to spend more money with your organization and they are going to come in with a higher trust level than a customer that you might get through other acquisition. So customer referrals are amazing. We want to celebrate those. Well, the same thing happens with employee referrals. We want employees who love what they do, who love serving the customers, who are living up to our customer experience mission. We want them to refer in other employees like them. So when you talk about referrals, make sure you're talking about both sides of that coin, because sometimes with employees, we push them a lot for those employee referrals. We say, hey, we want you to find us candidates for this role. But we don't talk about how that's connected to the customer experience. And then we don't talk about how those customer referrals are also so powerful. And so really celebrate and discuss referrals a lot, because this can help you drive your business forward in so many ways, not just on the customer side, but on the employee side as well. And then, of course, I mean, you guys knew I was going to end up here. We need to bring it all back to the mission, all back to the mission. How are your team members showing up for your customers? We need to communicate about our CX mission all the time. And then we want to celebrate that, you know what, this employee did this in a certain way, and this is why it was showing up for our customer. This is what this team did in order to really show up for our customers in this powerful way. It's an important part of your story, but it's also a really important part of your employee's story. So individually, we want every single employee to think, we did that. I was part of that. I helped live that mission. And if you can adjust your communication to reinforce just that message more and more and more, you will win, I promise. So even if you ignore the first 11 tips, if you can bring it back to this one, I promise you will see a shift in your organization and you will see a shift in your customer experience because of that shift. So this is the one that if you remember nothing else, remember this one. All right, so I'm going to hold this one up for just a second in case you want to grab a screen grab of this, because I know we went through these pretty quickly, but here are the first 6. And if you want to, drop in your questions right now too, make sure that you do that, because we'll be wrapping the presentation part up in just a second, and then we will go into your questions. So there's the first one, and then I'll hold this one up for a minute. And again, bring it all back to that mission. If you remember nothing else, that's what I want you to remember. And if you don't have a mission yet, guess what? You need one. And lucky for you, we have a develop your own CX mission workbook that you can download for free. So there's the link for that. And I also wanted to mention, if you are looking for more employee experience resources, we actually have an employee journey mapping workbook as well that you can download as well. So there are 2 of the resources that we have for you. If you want all of these resources and if you want more that are coming out, be sure you sign up for Year of CX at yearofcx.com, where we will be dropping some more downloads in the next few weeks. So essentially, what this all comes down to is that we ask our employees to participate in such an important way in the customer experience and in the overall health of our organization. And guess what? We need to communicate. Participation requires communication, because if we treat customer experience like a phrase and then we never talk about it again, then that is sending a message to our employees. If we talk about metrics, but we never actually talk about the why behind them, that is sending a message to our employees. And if we are talking about, company health and results, but we're not tying that back to the customer experience, then that is sending a message. And so the silence, the absence of communication also sends a message to our employees. That's why we have to just communicate over and over and over, more than you even think you have to, in order to get people to really internalize what this means for the customers and for your organization. So at this point, I'd love to take some questions and see how people are doing today.
Yeah, well, let's start with a comment from Jackson that I think leads into a good conversation around employee experience. Noting the connection between employee experience and customer experience, he says, if you want honest answers, ask honest questions. And one of the questions that he asked is, have we encouraged employees to feel comfortable in vulnerable situations? Do they feel psychologically safe enough to lean into vulnerability with our customers? So much of what we ask about in terms of, customer metrics is almost inviting employees to game the system to
Mhm.
make them look good, which then, of course, kind of muddles our data and makes us less effective at actually improving the customer experience and kind of ironically the employee experience at the same time. So can you speak to kind of some ways that we might be able to help employees be vulnerable and
Mhm.
not just make it all about getting the highest possible number?
I love this question. It's such a good conversation starter, and I think we could, there's a lot there. So, I totally agree that we have to do a better job making our employees feel safe about being honest. And I have seen some really terrible ways that we make this difficult. And one is that we ask for their honest, anonymous feedback, and then we somehow figure out who it is, and they know that, and they get all sorts of both implicit and sometimes explicit messages that tell them, what you said was not okay. um, I think we have to really work on a culture where it's okay. It's okay to talk directly. It's okay to say, you know what, we're not doing well here and we need to do something about it. And our customers are giving us honest feedback, and that is not a blame game, that's not something where we're going to look around and say, okay, who did this? We have to look at it from that customer's perspective and always put that forward as our goal. This is something we deal with in workshops when we lead workshops, because if you get a bunch of employees in the room and the boss is in there, you have to be aware that some people are not going to feel safe communicating in the way that they would without the boss there. And so you have to kind of continually focus on, why are we here? We're here for the customer. We are here for the customer. And so if blame comes up or if politics comes up, you have to really start moving that conversation in different directions. But I also am a huge fan of Brene Brown. And one of the things she talks about is like how to rumble, how to have those conversations. I highly recommend you check that out, because we have to also talk about, how should we talk to each other? What are the guidelines? What is safe and what isn't safe? What are the ways that we can have sometimes tension and conflict in a safe way? And so I really think that when we onboard employees, we have to make sure they understand those rules. We have to understand that we have to reinforce that, you know what, our culture is one of honest communication. Let's talk about what that actually means. Let's talk about why that's so important to us, both from customers and from employees. And let's talk about why you should feel okay doing that. So it's a wonderful point you bring up, Jackson, because I think we don't talk about that part enough in general. And that's what leads to assumptions, and that's what leads to uh, like that underlying conflict that can just drive people away, because that underlying conflict that nobody talks about, it's exhausting, right? Like, it is exhausting to work in an environment that way, and people just run for the hills. They do not want a culture like that. So it's a great thing to underline, and I think it's something we all need to work on.
Let's hop to a question from email this week. When it comes to customer interviews, what are some good questions to ask? And are there any questions we should absolutely avoid?
Yeah, I love customer interviews. I love to I like interviewing really open-ended questions, asking them about, why did they become a customer? What drew them to you? And did you live up to expectations? I love those questions because it gets people talking. I also love asking the magic wand question to customers. If you had a magic wand, how could we improve your experience? And you'll hear some really interesting answers there. I think what we don't want to answer are questions that are kind of leading to those gaming answers that we talked about in the last question. Like, we don't want to say, like, what would it take to get a 5 out of 5 from you here? Things like that just box people in. I would also avoid questions that are kind of not about what you're talking about. We are asking customers for time, which is a very limited resource when they agree to interviews. And so we really need to honor that. And so I would say the more that you can build rapport, it's super important, but also kind of respect that this isn't just a casual conversation that they're doing out of the goodness of their heart. This is something that they've offered as a value to us. And so we just want to really respect that.
That's great. Let's do another email question. Um, our company hasn't done anything in the realm of customer experience. What are some good ways to begin introducing those concepts? So this is talking about CX from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It says we don't really have any customer metrics, journey maps, processes in place for customer interviews, etc.
Hmm. Well, you're not alone. I would say that. And I would say that, talking about customer experience by definition is super important. And what I mean by that is, if you start saying customer experience is really important to us, and it's really important because I heard it's something that people care about. If one leader has a different definition than the other leader, then that can cause conflict right away. So what I would suggest is that you start with, how do we define great customer experience here at our organization? This is the step we usually skip. We usually don't talk about How are we defining great customer experience here? And what do we know we have to do to get there? So, starting with the basics, with how do we define it? What is our strategy? What is our customer experience mission? All those foundational pieces, those are super important. And the more that you can communicate about the why upfront and over and over and over, that's when people will start really understanding that this is not something that you're just talking about and that it's not something that is going to go away in a month. So go back to the why, go back to the why, go back to the why. And then also build that success statement. We have a downloadable for that too. But that's where you can really start showing how do customer experience results connect to those organizational goals and those outcomes that we're looking for. So tying all of those things together up front can really start laying the groundwork for then putting in a roadmap for, okay, what are we going to do to make sure we achieve all of our customer experience goals in the future? And what does that look like? And how do we change the culture and all of those things? So start with the foundations and then repeat yourself often and make sure that it's not just talk. Make sure they're seeing things go into place and that you're including employees in those conversations.
Great. Well, Karen, I see that in the YouTube chat you've got a longer question, so we'll definitely reach out to you there to let you know how you can send us that question, and we can maybe even bring it into the next video
Mm-hmm.
because we do these virtually every Friday, sometimes live, sometimes not. But other than that question, that is going to do it for our questions this week.
Excellent. Okay. So, thank you all so much for joining us. As always, we are always thrilled that you're here with us because, as you know, my mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by showing up here and learning and bringing that back to your organizations, you are helping me live that mission. So, thank you for that. And yeah, we are here every Friday, either live or virtually. We so if you don't want to miss anything, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel there. And we are always looking for ideas. What do you want to talk about here? What burning questions do you want me to address? Let me know. Send us an email and send us I'm going to put this up again. Send us an email. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me all these different places. So feel free to reach out to us and let us know what do you want to see us cover. Otherwise, make sure you're signed up for that Year of CX at yearofcx.com or visit us on the blog. We have tons of resources there as well. So good luck communicating. Remember to communicate often and repeat yourself because people need to hear the messages that you have about customer experience. So thanks so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time.